Yes, this is Dr. Malik Raheem, and I want to discuss briefly intergenerational trauma. I'd like to welcome you back to Nafs Healing, the transformation into and the journey into Black mental health, decolonizing Black minds. Intergenerational trauma in people of African descent usually refers to the transmission of trauma across generations, resulting from the collective historical and systemic experiences of slavery, colonialism, racial discrimination, and anti-Blackness. This phenomenon manifests in psychological, emotional, and social challenges that persist across generations, even among individuals who may not have directly experienced the original traumatic event. Let's talk about some key aspects of intergenerational trauma in people of African descent. First, you got to understand the historical roots. And one of the first things that we'll discuss when we're talking about the historical roots is the enslavement of people of African descent. Centuries of enslavement characterized by forced labor, family separation, and dehumanization disrupted familial and cultural structures. The colonialism is the exploitation and oppression under colonial rule, further exacerbating feelings of disempowerment and loss of identity. And of course, Jim Crow and systemic racism, including segregation, discrimination, and systemic inequality, perpetrated of cycles of trauma. The mechanisms of these transmissions are epigenetics, and this research suggests that trauma can alter gene expressions, which can be passed down to subsequent generations. Parenting styles. Parents who have experienced trauma may unintentionally pass down coping mechanisms or behaviors shaped by their own trauma. And cultural narratives. Stories of historical suffering are often shared within families and communities, reinforcing collective memories of pain. And then finally, structural inequalities, ongoing expressions and experiences of racism and social economic disparities sustain the efforts of trauma across generations. Psychological and emotional effects of intergenerational trauma includes things like chronic stress, persistent fear, anxiety, hypervigilance, often tied to racialized experiences. There's been a lot of cases where you might be the sole representative of a person of African descent, and you have the anxiety of being the collective representative. Past traumatic experiences of you being the only one can lead to a feeling of hypervigilance, where you feel like you're always being watched, always being focused on, different type of microaggressions, dealing with elements of impostor syndrome and implicit biases of anti-Blackness, of always being the one that being considered not as competent. Depression and grief, feelings of hopelessness and unresolved grief stemming from historical losses. Identity struggles, challenges with self-worth, cultural identity due to histories of oppression and erasure. Cultural resiliency and coping. Despite the pervasive effects of trauma, people of African descent have cultivated resiliency through spiritual practices. Religion, spirituality, and ancestral rituals serve as healing and protective factors. Community solidarity, strong communal bonds provide emotional and practical support. It is very important that people of African descent has a sense of belonging in the community that they're in. If they don't feel a sense of community and a sense of belonging, it exacerbates the intergenerational trauma and experiences that it is. The great art of storytelling and expressions through music, literature, and visual art offer therapeutic outlets for processing trauma. In my earlier episode of my podcast, I talked about how artists like Solange and Kendrick Lamar use their music as expressing the pain through Afro-pessimism. Janelle Monáe offering her art through Afrofuturism. And you have art authors like Octavia Butler, who is like the great Afro-surrealist, Afrofuturist. You have Toni Morrison, who is great with Afro-surrealism and Afro-futurism. You have shows like the Atlanta, that delves deep into Afro-surrealism. You have shows like Sorry to Bother You, Afro-surrealism. Even the horror film Get Out is dealing with Afro-surrealism. So it's like those things are elements of how art are expressed to art, music, literature, and visual art offer these therapeutic outlets for processing trauma. Even when you have artists like J. Cole, even to a lesser extent, some of the rappers like King Von, Lil Durk, Chief Keef, people like that from Chicago offer a surrealist, Afro-surrealist look at the violence that they haven't been experiencing. Some might say that it's the drill music is, overly, problematic because some might think it represents a look at glorifying the violence, but I look at it as a way of them releasing their pains and letting people know what's going on in their lives, especially with the young Black men, black youth. Vulnerability through the music, even though it has elements of hyper masculinity, it still shows a sense of vulnerability because it shows them expressing themselves, and you can use that to channel into what's going on with them as far as the trauma that they're experiencing, and use that to dig deeper into elements that are happening. Something to ever address intergenerational trauma, and to address this trauma must be multifaceted. Therapeutic interventions must be culturally competent, and a therapeutic approach, including trauma-informed approaches, must be culturally competent and culturally infused to help individuals and family process historical trauma and historical pain. Things like healing circles are very great, narratives and poetry. Things like this is very, very important. Systemic change, policies addressing systemic racism, poverty, and inequities that perpetrate trauma. Now, it's very important to note that in the theoretical approach of Afro-pessimism, it says that policies is not enough to liberate the anti-Blackness because it's so entrenched with the anti-Blackness that many people are blind to the fact of their anti-Blackness, especially policymakers. But policies are a way to start trying to make elements to try to heal it. And education, incorporating history and awareness of intergenerational trauma in academia and community settings to foster understanding and healing. Intergenerational trauma is not just a burden, It's also a call to action for individuals, communities, and societies to work toward healing, justice, and equity. And it's like, as we take this journey through the complexities of Black mental health and Afro pessimism, we must be remembered to be guided by the arts. And while Afro pessimism reminds us of the weight of anti-Blackness, it also calls us to find meaning in our resiliency. So I like to, as always, end with a quote, and this quote is from what the young people who they call K. Dot or Kendrick Lamar, and it's from his song "All Right." It says, "If God got us, then we're gonna be all right." This is not just a proclamation; it's a reminder of our collective strength, our collective resiliency. So thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of Nafs Healing, Decolonizing the African Mind. And hopefully if this resonates with you, that you share with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And as I say, it's Dr. Malik Raheem signing off. Thank you.